Hello and welcome to Live with the 19th Confronting Digital Blackface, which also happens to be our very first YouTube live event. Thank you all for joining us on this journey of live broadcasting for the first time. My name is Karen Hawkins. I am story editor here at the 19th. And tonight we are going to be talking about blackface and digital blackface. And blackface, of course, is this centuries-old practice of non-Black people dressing up as us to portray us. And I was recently at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in DC. Please go if you haven't already been. And there was a section talking about blackface being used right after slavery ended as a way to portray Black people as infantile and hapless and helpless to really justify us not having rights. And so blackface has a very dangerous history. And I think, as we're going to talk about tonight, continues to be dangerous for Black communities in many ways. So digital blackface, as I understand it, is an umbrella term, really, that describes a lot of different phenomenon, but it's non-Black people using memes and GIFs and photos and filters and even TikTok trends as reactions and as ways to express emotion. And so we have some examples here on deck. It is Oprah screaming, "You get a car." It is the Bob Marley Snapchat filter. It is FN Mecca, who I had never heard of before, but it is apparently an AI-generated rapper created by non-Black people who actually got a record deal. Completely fake, had a Black, I think, rapper actually doing the music, but the images of him were all AI. And he was later dropped from his record label after his creators posted images of him being hit by police and other images that people considered offensive and stereotypical. So you get the drift of what we're talking about when we talk about digital blackface. And I am so honored to be joined in this conversation by two of my new favorite people, I have to say. Tressie McMillan Cottom, or Genius Professor, as Trevor Noah recently dubbed you, who's a professor with the Center for Information, Technology, and Public Life at UNC-Chapel Hill and a New York Times columnist. Welcome to you, Tressie.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And Rachelle Hampton, staff writer for Slate and host of the ICY. I say this wrong all the time. In case you missed it, Internet Culture Podcast. Did I say that right?
You did, yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So again, thank you both for making time tonight. Couple programming notes. So we are on Zoom. You are watching this on YouTube. We can't see the YouTube chat, but we want you to be active there. We want you to be in community with each other. And we have 19 staff watching that chat, looking for questions. So if you have questions or comments as the conversation is going, folks are going to relay those to me, and then I will ask the panelists as we go if it makes sense. Otherwise, we'll just leave room at the end to have them. And one last thing for accessibility, closed captioning is available on YouTube in real time, even with live streams. If you click the CC in the corner, you can see closed captioning. And with that, we will jump into it. 19 staff, if I forgot anything, forgive me. But hello. All right, let's jump in, y'all. So excited for this conversation. So Tressie, I will begin with you. What is the first time that you remember seeing blackface, and what was your reaction to it?
Oh, wow. Remember the first time, I may not remember the first time I saw it because it's got to be earlier than the first time I remember seeing it and having it sort of like live in my body. Right. And gosh, that would be the Spike Lee movie, Bamboozled. If anybody remembers this film, I may be telling on myself here, age-wise, but that's all right because check the face. And thank you. Let's see. So I remember seeing this movie with a very good friend of mine. We were in a movie theater in Harlem, I think. And this is this is one of my artist friends. Like, this is the person that I would see like really interesting art with. So it wasn't like one of my sort of, one of my lazy friends. This is a person who we saw challenging stuff with. And so we go to check out Spike's latest, and people had been all over the place about reviewing the movie. And this is sort of, if it wasn't pre-internet, it was early internet. But I think this was pre-internet, because if it was early internet, there would have been more discussion and I would have remembered it. So it's pre-internet. And I remember sitting in that movie theater, and there's this scene, Savion Glover And there's a scene, he is depicting a dancer and a performer, and he shows it's Spike in characteristic Spike Lee style, and he shows Savion burning the cork that was used to make the ash that they would then mash into making the actual dark face paint to make the dark in the face. Savion is very light skinned, and it's just and it Spike's critique of the work that some Black actors have to make. It's very heavy-handed. It was a little early in my days of being a critical thinker, so it's heavy-handed, and these days I'd probably think it was too overwrought. But I remember watching Savion paint the blackface makeup on his face and trace out the sort of like clownish lips. And he's talking about those early days, of course, of the talkie movies of Black actors who had to do that exaggerated racialized performance for white artists or white audiences and white studios. And watching Savion's eyes as he puts it on, watching him shrink into that blackface. I mean, it's a brilliant performance on his part, because by the time he has it on, he's about 2 inches tall. Right? It diminished the way it diminishes him. You can see it in his eyes because he's this brilliant dancer. He's he can float, but by the time he has on the blackface, none of that matters. And I remember turning to my friend, and we're crying, and I remember it living in my body. And I said to him, I want to leave. I mean, I had a visceral reaction to seeing that. And it was, one of those pieces of art that really affects you, and realizing I was old enough by that point to realize that that's what art could do. So I'd read about minstrelsy, I read about blackface, but that was the first time I understood what it did to people, what it did to my people to see us depicted that way. And so that's the one that lives in me. So if anybody's ever seen that movie, by the way, again, it's pre-internet. Spike would have killed it, his art. He'd been making movies in his heyday during the internet age, because that's one of those that I think would have been circulating.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm putting it on my list because I think that's one I haven't seen. And I will tell you, audience, Tressie has an uncanny ability to talk you into seeing something that you didn't know you wanted to see. Rachel and I have both have fallen victim to this phenomenon already.
Yes.
Before we hit record. So just know she's gonna have you watching stuff. You're like, I didn't know I needed that in my life, but now I do. So
the digital green room got it did get a little compulsive back there. I was selling it hard in the digital green room. I was. Okay.
It was convincing. You got me.
I'm still on the fence, but Rachel, what about you? Do you remember the first time you saw either analog or digital, and how did it land for you?
I don't know. I think similar to Tressie, I don't know if I really remember the exact first time. I think it probably would have been with my mom. She really loved kind of older movies like Gone with the Wind, Imitation of Life, movies like that. And I haven't seen those movies in so long that I can't remember if either of them had instances of blackface in either one of them, but I remember seeing it in movies like that, in black and white movies was probably the first time that I really remember seeing it and recognizing it as that. And then probably after that, it would have been in like a history class or something. And I don't want to say high school because I went to public high school in Texas, and I do not think they cared enough about blackface to show us images of blackface. So it would have been in probably like a college African American studies class.
It's interesting because I haven't seen Gone with the Wind recently either, but I feel like even if there aren't explicit depictions of blackface, the Black characters in that movie are very similar to what you described, Tressie, this notion of just like, how can we shrink you as much as humanly possible so that you're barely human?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That is the trick. I mean, I remember even if, like you said, even if it wasn't blackface, like I remember, the racist cartoons, Sambo, or the stories my grandmother would tell me. Even early, the black and white Disney cartoons, I feel like seeing some of the early ones that maybe weren't blackface, but were really close. And I think you knew what was happening by the fact that you realized that some of those characters, were being played to be diminutive, right? They were smaller. They were, that somehow they were supposed to not be at scale with the other characters. And that's a type of a blackface. Yeah.
I don't know why this popped into my head, but I was babysat by the TV of my generation. No offense to you, Just Marry My Mother, but I was, and watched a ton of cartoons after school. And I remember, I don't remember the year, but there was a point at which Tom and Jerry cartoons had a Mammy in it. And I remember when I was very young, Mammy was full on Mammy. Yes. She was
I don't remember that.
just like full on. You know what I'm talking about, Rachel? Like just full.
Yes. Like the thickest calves you could see, because you never saw her face. You only saw her, because you didn't ever see any of the people's face in Tom and Jerry. It was only from the waist or the head up. But Black only had an apron on, was very clearly a maid in the house of whoever Tom's owner was, and just always kind of yelled like, "That cat!" in this like very heavy black synth. Yeah, that was still on when I was watching Tom and Jerry. I remember seeing that.
Oh, okay.
But there was a point at which it's like Aunt Jemima got sanitized. There was a point at which she went from Thomas to Thomas. Stop that. Like just somebody decided like this was not okay anymore.
Yes.
It was very recent, I think, within the last, I would say 10 years. By the time my little brother is about 9 years younger than me. So by the time he was watching Tom and Jerry, I didn't see that character anymore.
So we've touched on it a little bit, but why, this is a loaded question, I will admit, why is digital blackface not just harmless internet fun? Why is it not just like, oh, I'm just sharing this meme of Mariah Carey because it depicts how I feel? Like, why is that?
Yeah. Oh boy. First, I think I want to be honest about, there was a time when I was kind of eye rolly. So like, I want to acknowledge that I think it's easy to dismiss social media as not being super important, especially when we have so many big structural material things happening to us. So one of the first things that I had to recognize, and that I now like to say to other people who can be kind of eye-rolly about it, is what happens on the internet is big structural material stuff. And, that's my specialty. So I'm going to kind of harp on that, which is stuff that happens on the internet is part of the world we live in off of the internet. There is no longer any online, offline. That's the world. People make money that way. It's the economy. People move goods that way. It's a market. People learn that way. It's education. People meet and fall in love and maintain relationships that way. It's interpersonal. It's networks. It's families. It's kinship. So if any of those things matter, then it matters, right? So it isn't just media, although media is huge, right? So it isn't just media. It matters that for those reasons. It's embedded in everything that matters to us. And I think it matters for the same reason that blackface matters. The digital just means that it is happening in a realm where everybody can participate. We couldn't all make Tom and Jerry commercials. So it was easy to say Disney's doing this to us. We're now doing it to ourselves and to each other. So digital doesn't make it smaller. Digital just makes us all guilty and complicit. So if anything, it's more diffuse and it's bigger, not smaller. I think we said when we think that when we modify it with digital, it means it's less important. No, it just means it's bigger, right? It's more accessible. It's more participatory. So like digital blackface is about like spectacle and culture. And it's about who has the power to turn somebody else's culture into spectacle, to reduce somebody's culture to spectacle, usually for capital, right? How other people can turn Black culture, Black lives, and especially the oppression of Black people into spectacle for money and for status. When we use our emotions online to express ourselves, we don't often have the same power to benefit from it. We don't get the same amount of likes. There's tons of studies about how we don't benefit from the algorithms online to turn that into street cred. And guess what? Another word for street cred is social capital. Another word for visibility is symbolic capital. That's how you get agents. It's how you get sponsorships. Another word for that is financial capital. Again, these are real world things. So it's small, but that's the economy in the world we live in for a lot of people. And we don't have the same power to do that. When other people can extract it from us and then translate that into forms of capital, well, that's an age-old story. That's called extraction, and that's called power and oppression. And I think when we understand it in those terms, it is the opposite of small, right? It's just another tool to outsource, people's emotions to Black people when Black people can't benefit from our own emotional value, from our own emotional experiences. And if we can't own our emotions, if we can't even own our own experiences, in a world that's built on, a social media mediated world, if you don't own even that, you're pretty dispossessed. So that's why I think it matters, and why it's important for us to not think that because it's digital that it's unimportant.
Yeah. So I have a kind of two-part answer to this. The first is that I think digital Blackface as a conversation often gets boiled down to, can I use this GIF or not? In the same way that I think conversations about the N-word get boiled down to, if a white child was dying of cancer and their last wish was to say the N-word, would you deny them that right? When that is just kind of so far afield of what is important. But the piece that really kind of popularized the term digital Blackface was written by Lauren Michelle Jackson in, I think, around 2017. And in that essay, she's not just talking about GIF usage, she's also talking about the ways that people pretend to be Black online to incite harm against Black women. She talked about Your Slip is Showing, which is this movement created by Black digital scholars Shafika Hudson and Anasa Crockett, who in 2014 noticed that trolls from 4chan were pretending to be Black feminists online and starting a hashtag called End Father's Day, which was this attempt to get a hashtag to trend so that people would think that Black feminists were ridiculous and making kind of laughable claims. And one of the ways in which these accounts impersonated Black people was by using really heavy GIF usage. It was this kind of aping of the ways that Black people spoke to each other online. And so the way that that kind of presents today is, I don't know if it's necessarily intentional in the way that 4chan trolls were attempting to be, but as someone who spends a lot of time online, it has become not necessarily harder, but it's definitely become squishier to determine who is Black online and who isn't based on the way that everyone uses the same dialect, and that dialect is largely Black. If you go into a TikTok comment section, you will see the same phrases and words, and they spread in weeks, and they come from insular Black communities that language wouldn't have spread beyond without the help of the internet. And so that language is used, as Tressie is saying, mostly for financial clout and social clout. and to gain capital. And so I think that this conversation often gets distilled down to the most boring form of what am I personally allowed to do as a white person, when it's more like what is happening on the internet, that reactions are racialized, that we expect to see in response to something just a flurry of gifs of Black women acting in a very specific way. And half the time we don't know who those Black women are, and we don't know if they personally gained anything off of the fact that their face is synonymous with a specific emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for that. And I was recent, someone I think in our Slack work recently shared something about making fun of millennials pretending to be Gen Z and using all of this Gen Z language, and the comment section was full of people being like, no, that's Black culture. Like,
Yeah.
no, all these things that you're saying are synonymous with Gen Z. That's just how Black people talk. Like,
Yeah.
So like I think both of you said, it's so extractive that we just become used to it being just the way we operate as a culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So one question, and I just want to say, I should have said this in our digital green room, but we were just so busy that I want this to be a conversation. So I have questions for y'all, but please also just, free flowing if you just have something that want to keep it going. But I will ask another question. So does this phenomenon, does what we're describing make people think that they know the Black experience?
Oh, goodness. Yes. I just had this amazing conversation, with someone. And I probably shouldn't say so because the interview was for a project I'm working on, but whatever, who cares? Who's gonna sue me? Who's gonna sue me? Who gonna check me, boo? See how I can do that? That's authentic, right? You see? Who gonna check me? It's my show. Okay, the other thing's my show. This isn't my show. And so and because the conversation was so fascinating, because we were saying there's this slippage. I was speaking to this researcher about what happens when popular culture doesn't accurately represent, especially low stakes pop culture, the pop culture we don't take seriously, right? Mm-hmm. Comedies, romance novels that are the ones that we think is, beneath us thinking about seriously. And she's like, but those are the places, low stakes, where we would benefit from like thinking a little about these things because the stakes are so low. Just like, but when we don't, but we're more likely to consume that stuff, people take their messages about social progress and racism and classism and gender and all that kind of stuff from that pop culture and get a false sense that they know groups of people from that pop culture. And that really resonated with me. And I think about that with your question just now, that what it does, and this just, from, thinking about Patricia Hill Collins' Controlling Images, so much classic Black feminist literature that said the problem with sort of like stereotypical images in the way that pop culture circulates, because it is sort of a democratically available cheap currency of media. So, and this is even before the internet, so accessible, so cheap, much less what we now have. I mean, TikTok, just a constant stream of availability of these images. You get a sense of knowing that you frankly haven't earned, a way of interpersonal connection with a community, with people, with human beings that give you nuance, that give you context. Context, I think, is the big key. Context. It's like, learning one line of a song and thinking the whole song, learning anything out of context. And so, I think that's the whole thing. Remixing a culture. A meme is a remix of a culture. It's learning the remix without learning the original song. And so it gives you a false sense of intimacy. I can't tell you how often, I think every Black woman in particular has had this experience where somebody talks to you over familiar because they think you the gift. Like, I'm an actual human being, honey, and I don't. You don't know me, and I do not know you.
No,
We're not familiar. No, exactly. Like
Right.
this is
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I often think about it in relation to the fact that this study is pretty outdated, but I love to cite it in that there was a study that said 3/4 of American white people don't have any Black
I
friends.
was thinking the exact same thing, exacerbated by the fact that they
3/4
don't know any
of white people don't have any Black friends. And when I think about that, I think the only way that most white people in America interact with unfiltered Black thought, unfiltered Black expression, unfiltered Black humor or laughter is through social media. And that's not unfiltered. That is carefully mediated and thought out. And so it does give this false sense of intimacy. And I think about the fact that because most white people don't have Black friends, the only ways they're interacting with Black people is on contexts where Black people cannot be honest, in work situations, in like service situations, in situations where it's just not safe to actually react in the way that you would. And so most white people do not have access to see the reactions that they're using to express their own emotions. And that just presents a really weird little conundrum in that what you're seeing is not real. And you also don't have access to see it in the real world, but you think that you know of it, and yet you don't, because social media gives this idea, this false impression of intimacy, of closeness, that it just doesn't exist.
Yep.
And I wonder where that, I mean, my mind is reeling at the 3/4 number. I wonder where that number lands. Like, this percentage of white people have one Black friend. And poor Keisha gets cited for everything. Oh, well, I was talking to Keisha and she thinks it's fine. Keisha does this with her hair. Keisha, just like, it's the people who have no Black people around them. And then there's that subset of people who have just that one.
Yes.
Yeah. It comes to representation for everybody.
Yeah. And the one, I mean, more seriously, I was going to make a joke, but I'll be more serious about it. And the one, I mean, the way that social scientists define friend and the way people use that, is very different. And what they may be calling a friend and what the Black person may consider themselves are two very different things. So, like, do they even know that person intimately? It's very different. Like, how many people have you spent the night at their home? Have you been to their family functions? Have you seen them in the middle of a trauma? Have you seen them, like, an intimate friendship, far different from your work friend, right? I think that is a different level of like intimacy, to Rachel's point, and that's just not that common in a deeply segregated cultural world.
Yeah. I often make a joke that whenever I get a shiver down my spine, it's because a white person I've spent 2 hours with is calling me their Black friend.
Somebody somewhere,
somebody somewhere is saying, Rachel, my Black friend, and I'm just like, something's wrong with the universe right now.
Yeah.
Like my grandmother used to say, my nose itching, somebody's coming.
Yeah.
My hands itching, we get some money.
Yeah.
Wow.
All the chill. Somebody just called you their Black friend. Somebody somewhere.
So, a question, and then I'm going to try to get into some positives. Like, what does it look like to portray us respectfully online is the next question. But one last one before this. Like, I'd like to have a conversation. What is it about our reactions? Black women, Black folks, Black LGBTQ folks, we haven't even gone there yet. What is it about the way that we express ourselves that is so enticing, that makes it so irresistible for people to use our images in these ways? Or is it just obvious? Like, look at us.
Yeah.
Part of it is obvious. I think Black people are the funniest people in the world. I think just the way Black people laugh is the funniest thing in the world. It's There's a way in which I think when you know true struggle and grief and sadness, that joy is expressed fully because you know what it's like not to have it. But I also think a lot of it is projection, to be completely honest. Sometimes I wonder how much people finding me funny, white people finding me funny, is not actually about me being funny. It is about the expectation that me showing up as a Black woman, expressing my emotions in a way that I think is quite normal, is oversized. It's the way in which you can speak very calmly and people will think that you're angry. That happens, I think, with laughter and with reactions as well. And so everything that you do is heightened because it's surveilled. And so I often wonder if the enticing part of using these gifts, of seeing these expressions, isn't actually, if you just looked at it objectively, if it's actually happening or if it's just laden with all of this other stuff.
That's basically what I was gonna say. I could not have said it better. I especially that second part. I am 95% sure I'm not as funny as white people think I am, and I'm 100% sure that I'm smarter than they think I am. So a lot of this is about their expectations and their projection. The only other thing that I would add, again, I absolutely agree that it is something about us. I think it's about rhythm and socialization. I also think there's something about the fact that we don't have the power to outsource our emotions to anybody else. So we own our emotions and we have to own them. And so we fully express them, our laughter, our pain, our joy, our sorrow. And I think that the trauma of oppressing other people requires you to have some distance from your own experience of the world, your distance from some of your emotions, your experience of your humanity. And so you have to outsource some of your experiences to other people, the people you've dispossessed. And we don't have to do that because we don't have to pay that price of power. And so we're miraculous, yes, and we're amazing. There's some projection there, and there's the fact that we don't outsource our emotions, I think, to other people. But yeah, sometimes we ain't that funny. We ain't that funny.
Yeah.
Well, and I love this idea of we have access to the full range of human emotion in a way that other people do not.
Yeah.
And I think it shows up in so many ways.
Yeah, when you're not paying the psychic wage, I think, of white supremacy, you have access to the range of human emotions.
So I feel like that is a whole other 45-minute conversation. Okay, chat, please do be active. Like I said, I can't see it on YouTube, but if you have questions for these amazing folks, please put them in the chat and they will be relayed to us. So what are some antidotes to digital blackface? I know I should have told y'all.
Rachel, I'm like, what you got?
Oh, that is a very complicated question because I don't know. Like I said, I really do believe the most boring part of this conversation is what gifts can I use? And I cannot express how bored I am by that conversation because it turns into this conversation on policing people's behavior that is, again, ultimately very, very not interesting to me. And so I think the thing that is interesting to me is people being critically aware of where their behaviors are coming from. There are, just because of the way like TikTok spreads and because of the way things on the internet spread, there are gestures and vocal inflections that are so familiar to me from my aunts and my mother and my cousins that I am now seeing people who do not have any community with Black people use. And it is so just deeply disorienting to see and to be present for. And it's hard to necessarily feel, there's no blanket statement. I don't think there's any way to just blanket say, don't do this or don't do that, especially because when you're on TikTok, you don't know where it comes from. You see your favorite influencer do it and you think that's just a fun, quirky little thing that they're doing, and I'm going to pick that up too.
Yeah.
But I just think that we should all be more critical about the words that we're using and the phrases that we're using. I, as a Black person who grew up in a few different places in New York, a few different places in the United States, one of them is not Philly. So I don't use John because that's not language that I grew up with. Like there is this idea that if you know of it, then it is yours and you are able to use it. And I just don't think that's true. And I think we should all be aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I gotta think. So like as a creative person who like loves creative people and creative cultures, I just gotta think there's a place between loving something and needing to consume it.
Mhm.
And I love so many things, and I don't need to bring it into my body. I don't need to eat the other. And I think there has to be a way to like love something, appreciate it. TikTok knows about me that I love haka. You play a haka for me, I don't know what it is. Listen, and I know I saw something recently, others said, what is about Black people in haka?
Yeah.
Something about that collective effervescence, honey. They go and something wells up in me. It is more reliable to me than a church service. I'm just saying, you play, but I don't feel the need to go into the ritual. I don't feel the need to wear it as a costume. I think in part because my own culture is so rich and I appreciate so much of what my own people have. I'm good, right? I can just appreciate it. So I think there is something about being steeped enough in your own culture that you don't need to, right? There's a certain amount of remixing of culture that is natural, right? No group of people completely 100% owns rhythm, for example, no matter how much we may say we do, right? And nobody owns vocal variations, right? There's some of this stuff, but there are traditions of storytelling or traditions of narratives. And I think particularly where we got to be careful, there are traditions of traumas. So these things that especially emerge out of traumas, you can't just take that. When the joys emerged out of trauma traditions, we got to be very careful about taking that and turning it and stripping it of the traumas that produced it. And I think that's the places where people get into trouble. So like, what does that look like? I just got to think that changing the financial incentives matter. I'm one of those people where I think if it's less profitable for people to parade and turn people into costumes, people will do it a little less.
Mm-hmm.
And so that probably looks like, listen, this is pie in the sky kind of stuff. But if we built better platforms with better incentives, where algorithms didn't juice the algorithm for white people performing other cultures' costumes and instead allowed the algorithm to promote people authentically promoting their own cultural expressions. So we know, for example, for a fact that the TikTok algorithm, what we do know of it is that it absolutely does privilege accounts that do what what I think the kids call culture vulturism, the culture vultures over authentic culture performers. And we do know there is an agency system that prefers young, blonde, white stars, social media stars over the authentic cultural performers, content producers. So like changing the financial incentives can change, I think, people's taste for who represents what kinds of culture. And I think that could matter a lot. I actually think it's easy to change audiences' tastes and preferences. We've seen how easy it can be manipulated by the algorithm. And so like putting pressure on making that work, they chase that easy hit, which is, oh, isn't it cute when the young blonde white girl sounds like a middle-aged Black woman? Because that works. We're all trained and socialized from birth to consume that. And so it's easy, cheap. It's like the crack of American culture, which is these days global culture. But we can wean ourselves off of that. We can wean ourselves off the powder. I think we can, we can tweak the algorithm. And I just sounded like a anti-drug campaign, but yes, I got to think that matters.
Well, I just want to interject with this. I think both of you are hilarious. I know that you said that it's people projecting, but I find both of you hilarious. Just want to put that out there.
I trust when a Black woman tells me I'm hilarious. Sometimes there's an outsized laugh from a white man, and I'm just like, that wasn't that funny. I love myself, but that wasn't that funny.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah. But we're all hilarious.
Thank you. One thing that came up for me, kind of both of your answers to that question, is this phenomenon that like white is not considered a race, and that whiteness is not considered a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like maybe or if it was the first time I went to a pride parade, or the first time I went to like a friend's like a Puerto Rican wedding, and just like everybody's dancing, or you go to a pride parade and it's just like, I am steeped in this culture. Like this is a cultural experience. And I feel like a lot of people don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have this sense of their own culture. So that's why they're putting on everybody else's culture. I don't know how that lands for y'all, but
I think that's true. And I think that it's, especially when you're a digital native, it is so hard. And it is my job to do this, to track down where trends are coming from, to track down the originator of a trend. And it is hard. And it is intentionally hard. And it is getting harder because Google sucks now. The TikTok search function is barely existent. Twitter is being slowly dismantled. Actual digital archivists are noting that it is harder and harder to find things online. So I do not blame the average teenager who is growing up and trying to figure things out. And at that age, we're all putting things on and taking them off and trying to figure out who we are. So I also want to offer grace for a lot of the people that we see come up as the topic of these conversations on digital Blackface. Often they're teens, they're children who, I think one of the worst things social media has given us is the access to like teens growing up, basically. We should not have this much access to teenagers making mistakes. They should be able to make mistakes without the full weight of the internet behind them, waiting to yell at them. So I just want to offer them grace. But I think we also all know when we're putting something on that doesn't fit is what I often come down to. I think you learn that as you get older. And so this is mostly for people whose brains are fully developed, but like everyone knows when they're trying something on and it doesn't fit and it doesn't work for them. And if you feel that feeling, just stop and find something that does.
Yeah. I push back on the white people in my life who, sometimes often said in a jokey way, we don't have any culture. I'm like, that's not true. You may not like your culture, but you have one. Right. And maybe the work for you is to find what's funny and what you don't like about it. Because it's just isn't true that you don't have one. And also a lot of what you gave up to be white was the culture that you lost. You gave up being Irish. Maybe you gave up being Danish. Maybe you gave up being Scottish so you could be white, but maybe that's where your party is. And maybe that's where your authentic expression is. Maybe that's where your collective effervescence is what I'm saying to you, right? Like, I think it's cool. I think your Renaissance fair, go that, right? Do your jam.
Do your square line dancing is coming back? I'm like, white people broke the mold with line dancing. That is so fun. They went off.
off.
They went off. There's also this trend on
Do it.
TikTok where people are like, why did white people get rid of all their swear words? Like, so many of them are so, like, son of a gun. That's so
Do
fun.
that.
Like,
Do that.
yes.
Right? I saw people recently doing something called contra dance, which is a type of square dance. Those were some happy people. Do you hear me? There was joy in that building. There was joy. And nobody was getting hurt.
Yeah.
Do that.
Yep.
Find that in that. And I think, so I'm not sure that it's true that there isn't culture. What I think is that there isn't a culture that has someone to decenter when they do that. So if you go to the square dance party, right, you have a chance of being othered on some basis of who you are as a person, right? You don't square dance well. You didn't dosey on the dough, right? You didn't wear the right saddle shoes or something, right? But when you go into a space and you can take someone's Blackness, and I want to point out, by the way, it's also, there's a lot of Orientalism in the world, happens with Indigenous people too, right? And you can take that and you can turn that into a costume. You got enough power in that room where even if you got two left feet, or even if you got on the weird outfit, you can't be othered, even if you're the weirdo. That's what they're buffering. That's what they're protecting, I think, against, being the weirdo. And that's why, we don't have any culture. Yeah, you do. Go risk being weird at the contra dance.
I can't think of a better way to end this conversation than that, to be honest. Such a mic drop. If you are not already following and listening to and watching these two brilliant individuals, start right now. Please do. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. This was such a blast. I can't believe it's already been 45 minutes. What in the world? Thank you. Thank you. I have been instructed to ask all of you to sign up for the 19th Represents Hybrid Summit, which is taking place May 18th to May 20th. It is both virtual and it is in person in my hometown of Chicago on May 20th. To save your spot for either of those, RSVP at summit.19thnews.org. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you again to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.